Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this unscheduled stream for once. Um, I thought I would want to follow this game between Aronian and Carlsen. It was very exciting from the start, and its stuff is still going on, even though there's been some more exchanges. So we're actually gonna go back for a little bit and look at what happened to get this position here. Um, and I think the interesting part in the opening is when Aronian played c4. That's a very aggressive move, and he's clearly trying to get some kind of advantage. He has the majority on the queen side. He's pushing this pawn so that it's far advanced, and we get a very unbalanced position because Magnus has the pawn on e5, which gives him a kingside majority, possibility of attacking toward the black king when he castles kingside. And this pawn on c4 enables Aronian to attack on the other side. And actually, one of the main things about this move is that it avoids Magnus playing bishop d3. This could be a good move for white, and now c4 avoids that, but it's a big decision because it relieves or kind of it it removes any pressure on the white center. So when you play a move like c4, avoiding the possibility of exchanges in the center, it's very committal. It means that you it means that you're taking big risks and you give your opponent attacking chances. Because the kind of mantra is that if your opponent attacks on the flank, then you should attack in the center. And having made this c4 move, black has kind of given up on attacking the center. There's no more pressure toward these two white central pawns. But black is saying, yeah, I don't care really about you getting a good center. I'm going to use this space advantage on the queen side to create my own attack. And the following couple of moves are very instructive because we need to keep in mind what is the point of attack we want to go in a closed pawn structure, and that is the root of the pawn. So this pawn on d5 is protecting this pawn on c4. So the pawn on c4 is pretty safe because it's protected. Therefore, we should go after the pawn on d5. And it's a very similar story for white. He has this very good pawn on e5. It's protected by the pawn on d4, so you cannot really attack the pawn on e5. The pawn on d4 is also very good, and it's protected by the pawn on c3, so you can't really get toward that pawn either. So what you're left with is the pawn on c3. This one is not protected by any white pawns, and that is the root of the pawn chain, and that is the one we want to attack. So black attacks this one, white attacks this one. And the thing is, if we manage to get, for instance, this pawn on c3, then we can start attacking the pawn on d4 and the pawn on e5 from behind. And this is very similar to what actually happened in the game. So g3 is a good move because it plans to put the bishop pointing towards d5. Bishop e7, bishop g2, bishop d3 from Aronian. And now he's preventing white from castling. So Magnus goes knight g1. He actually puts the knight back where it started out. The main point is to put the knight on e2 so that you block this diagonal and enable the king to castle. But there's another point as well, because we were talking about you want to attack on d5, and this knight is now being rerouted to a position where attacking on d5 is very much a possibility. At the same time, you see that Black has started his plan of attacking c3. He starts out with the queen, that's not going to be enough. And now he comes with the bishop. And if the bishop is able to come from behind and capture all of these white pawns, it would be a complete disaster. Castles, castles, rook e1. And now it's very, very, very interesting, I think. Because the natural move here would be to go bishop b2, attacking, attacking the rook on a1. And we can also see that the bishops are actually trapping the rook on a1. But the thing is that here Magnus has a really strong exchange sacrifice. He just goes rook b1. And you can take this rook and take back. But the thing is that now you kick this bishop away, and then it's very difficult to keep all of these black pawns. The queen starts by taking on b7. If the knight moves, then d5 is in trouble. But d5 is really in trouble anyhow. Knight e7, knight f4. Here we see the knight doing the maneuver to very good effect and getting at the d5 pawn. So this, the computers were saying this was very, very strong for white. So this bishop at the moment is worth more than this rook. And it means that Aronian needs to make some preparation moves. So in this position, which we had at the board, he played rook d8. So he appreciates that this pawn is going to be in trouble at some point. So I better start protecting it right now instead of having to protect it later. And now, for instance, this rook b1 move is not as effective when there's not a bishop on b2 to attack. So, for instance, here a normal move would be knight f4. But now bishop b2 is a good move. Not really because you want to take the rook. And that's kind of the funny thing about this pawn structure. It's just as important that you want to take the pawn on c3. Because removing that pawn means that the pawn on d4 also loses its defender. And suddenly you could get the bishop just raiding through the white pawn chain and removing every single central pawn that white has. So instead of knight f4, Magnus in this position played bishop g5, attacking the rook, and Aronian says, well, if you want that rook, you may have it. He goes rook bishop b2, Magnus takes the rook, takes back, and once again, it's not really about this rook. It's not a disaster for Magnus if Aronian was to take this rook. However, it is pretty bad if he loses the pawn on c1. So the rook is attacked on a1, and what does Magnus do? He plays rook c1. He keeps the rook being attacked. There's an option for black to just take the rook. But it's all about the pawn on c3. He wants to make sure that he doesn't lose this pawn. And actually, it's interesting because after bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, you could actually say that Aronian achieved his goal. In this position, he does have the possibility of playing bishop takes c3. And with that pawn, you can also see that the d4 pawn is in massive trouble. And I didn't have time to computer check this, but I was listening to the official commentary, and they were saying that taking this pawn could be very risky on account of e6. Um, and spoiler alert, Aronian did not, in fact, take this pawn. So it's a real possibility that this e6 move is just brilliant. But it's going to take making some moves on the board to figure out how or why. Uh, okay, I have been ignoring the chat for a little bit. The fact that there was no complaints makes me think that the sound is okay. We have people in the chat for unscheduled stream. We have Yaya Nihar, we have Bruce Easy, Groger, Atomic Player, Andrew, Chupacapa. Yeah, good morning is because it's 8 a.m. here in San Francisco in the Bay Area. We have Chesbay, Robin, and we have VGD Mod, Yataman, Red Emperor. Everyone is in the house. So we gotta figure out this e6 move, because that's probably the reason Aronian didn't take on c3. So the thing is, taking on c3 attacks d4, attacks the rook. If you move the rook, then just bishop takes d4. Yes, black is an exchange down, but on the other hand, he has two pawns for that exchange, and the white central pawns are just magically disappearing from the board. So this would actually be quite a bit of trouble for white. So he should immediately start the counterattack. So e6 probably good. Bishop takes e1 because then you remove the rook, which is an integral part of the attacking scheme white has started. Take on f7, take back, rook takes on e1. I agree, this looks pretty scary. So if we try to hide this king, for instance, by just going back, then there's some trouble with queen e6, king in the corner, and then queen e8. And then you figure out you didn't really hide your king as much as you got it checkmated on the bottom rank. And that's no good. So running away is not going to help you. Let's see what happens if you take a pawn on d4. Definitely risky. Definitely risky. This is probably a good move. But this also looks good. Let's do this one. King back. I mean, if black is able to play something like h6, then he is 2 pawns up. Okay, suggestion from Jake in the chat to go rook takes e1 instead of taking on f7. To keep the pawn on e6. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like it. It feels to me that it gives black some extra options, such as rook f8, for instance, trying to get the rook to coordinate together with the king, doing the defensive duties. Yeah, I'm not a big fan. I like this taking on f7 because it forces the king onto a risky square. Takes back, knight takes. I am tempted by this queen h5 because one of the advantages of this move is that king g8 is not possible because of rook e8. So that means after queen h5, king f8 is really the only possibility. And then maybe I can take this one at some moment. But not this moment, because right now black is threatening the rook on e1. It's not entirely clear to me why this is. I mean, I can see that it's very risky for black, but I cannot see a refutation, immediate refutation. Maybe rook e5, because then the queen is no longer having some threats against the rook, and I'm creating some threats against d5. But maybe you can solve it with h6, because then you prevent rook g5, you give the king an escape square. There's a lot of good things that happen with this move. Ooh, maybe bishop e4. That would be trying to get the bishop joining the attack, taking a look at the position and just deciding that the bishop is the one piece not contributing in this attack. That actually looks pretty strong to me. Because the queen is kind of stuck. The queen needs to defend d5 and it needs to defend d8. And of course you cannot take this bishop, because then you lose the queen. Queen e1, says Jake. Yeah, but then I have an escape square on g2. And as I was saying, when you move the queen, you're going to have this threat against d8. And you're going to have the threat against d5. And both of those threats are pretty serious. And I think this is just winning instantly for white. There's just too many threats. So you can take the bishop now, but then I take your rook. And not only do I take your rook, I take your knight as well. And with the rook down, there's no doubt that black is going to lose this. Yes, comment in the chat. There's a fork. Yes, that is true. There is a fork with knight c6 attacking both the queen and the rook. But now comes my big finale. Queen e6 check. And this is actually checkmate in 3 moves. Because if I go king f8, then rook f5 is checkmate. Which is one of the good things about putting the rook on e5, is that you have this opportunity if the knight moves. And that means you only need to find a solution for king h8. But with the bishop joining the attack, there's still the back rank things going on. So queen e8, take that, take back, and it's checkmate. So I'm not sure I got all of these lines correct, but that bishop e4 move looked really, really good. So I'm thinking where, if not, this is the line that refutes this for black, then it's very close. Udai asks, was this on the schedule? No, I'm trying to be a bit unpredictable. Now, I had the idea last night that if I woke up early, I could do the stream, because I think Carlsen-Aronian has a tendency of creating some very, very interesting games. And I was right. This is a really fascinating struggle. So I thought, let's do it. Let's go on a line. Let's use this time. It's also, it's been raining the entire night, so I don't mind sitting inside for a little bit. Okay, let's go back to the game, because as Ryataman says, Magnus just played e6 in an entirely different position. Yeah, so what happened was that this bishop didn't get the opportunity to take on c3, which would have created, ripple effects for the entire white pawn chain. So instead, Aronian played bishop takes c1, and Magnus takes back. Now he gets the protection on the c3 pawn. Queen a3 tries to force the rook away from defending on c3. Magnus plays queen e3. And this is very interesting because Magnus is clearly showing that the c3 pawn is crucial to him. But on the other hand, he's very happy to give up this pawn on a2. He doesn't really care about this pawn. He only cares about these pawns, which are doing a good job of protecting each other. And Aronian too says that, well, taking this one is going to be too risky. I'm going to play b5 instead, try to get the queenside attack going. And now Magnus went e6. So Magnus is trying to open up the position, and he's also trying to remove one of the pawns guarding the black king. So black's king would feel much less secure if these two pawns were to be exchanged. I'm actually going to have to do something with my chat. Because I thought I remember last time the stream, I had to go on the settings to make sure that my phone didn't go into resting mode or power saving mode all the time. But I thought that having fixed it that time, it was kind of fixed for eternity. But it would appear that was a bit too optimistic. Let's see. Resting mode. I think it's good. Okay. Okay, but anyhow, after e6, Aronian went f6. And that, I think, is about the white rook and the white queen. So if the pawns were to be exchanged, it would also mean that the queen could enter the position. And by playing f6, you make sure that, yes, white gets a really, really dangerous pawn on e6. But on the other hand, this pawn might be in the way of the rest of the pieces, the bishop, the queen, the rook, all of which they really want to use this e6 square. So f6 is interesting. Okay, there may have been some chat messages the past couple of minutes I missed. But if you had an important question, feel free to repeat it. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, no, f6, there has been another move. The guys are playing pretty quickly. So h4 from Magnus, that makes me feel a little bit bad because honestly, I was gonna suggest that move. I really was. And then knight e7. That's a good blockading move from Aronian. So now he's saying this pawn is in the way of your attacking pieces. And now you can't even sacrifice this pawn by just giving it away, because I'm going to put my knight in the way. And this knight is also going to protect my biggest weakness, the pawn on d5. So Aronian has actually constructed a pretty good defensive setup. And now he's going to be attacking. He still has a plan. He has this majority on the queen side. And he's going to push those pawns and see if they can achieve anything. Interesting stuff. And this, I think, with that, we have reached the current position in the game. Udai asks, "How is our host, Mr. Sharma, doing?" No, he's doing good. He's doing very well. And Distant Fire prays Moobot doesn't kick him for posting the links, but he has posted a link about the 5 reasons to watch the Pro Chess League live finals. Um, and for those of you who haven't been in the chat that much, I am in San Francisco and I am here to watch the Pro Chess League finals in person. So that I'm looking forward to. And I'm going to San Francisco later today. So I've been staying in the East Bay area, and yesterday I went to my old school. When I was 9, I went to my family lived a year in Berkeley, and so I went back to my old school. Um, I was hoping to kind of say hi to my old teacher. And I thought she still worked at the school because I had Googled her name and the name of the school and found a web page which said she was still teaching the same grade. Unfortunately, um, that was an outdated website. So I found the school's current website, and she was nowhere to be found. Rook B1. And also, speaking of, they had spring break, so I couldn't even go into the school and try to find my old school team trophy from the time Oxford Elementary School finished. I don't know what place we got, but we finished pretty high in the Berkeley School Championship, and that was pretty rare. And I won all my games on board 2 for the Oxford Elementary School. And Chessbay informs us that people have met Arun Sharma on some of Christian's streams, Christian Chirilla. So yeah, the house I'm in, actually Christian lives here as well. And that is why you've seen Arun there. Brandon has made a ranking of chess commentators in my chat, in which I am third behind Danny and Anna. You might think, oh, no particular order, he says. He says no particular order after ranking, specifically ranking people 1, number 2, number 3. Okay. If you're gonna make a ranking in my chat, you better have me first, or at least, second. I'm very used to being second. Number 2 in Norway, second in World Championship matches, stuff like that. Okay, so Rook B1 from Magnus made it was a threat toward B5. For some reason, my arrows are not cooperating. Okay, so he had a threat against B5, and Aronian plays A6 to protect that one. Which is interesting because number one, now Aronian gets the nice pawn chain, pawns protecting each other, doing a very brotherly job. But on the other hand, it's now going to be much more difficult for Aronian to play A5 and then B4. My arrows are really not cooperating out there. So now it's going to be more difficult for Aronian to go forward with these pawns. But on the other hand, if he just stays here, I mean, they are doing a fantastic job of protecting each other. Maybe he can try to take this pawn on a2 finally. He can go for use his queen, take on a2. Arrow's not cooperating. Ah, there. He can take on a2, and then he can just go back with the queen, go into defense, and try to attack the pawn on e6. It's pretty time consuming, but at the moment it does feel like Aronian has blocked the position pretty well, and he might get away with grabbing that pawn. There's been some moves. Let's go see. Okay, so a6. Magnus has played queen d2. That is actually a shocking move to me. So Magnus actually does think that this pawn was under threat. So he goes back with the queen protecting it. And that invites queen d6, which Aronian played pretty much instantly. And now the queen is attacking on e6. There's some trouble for Magnus to decide how to protect this pawn. Okay, I guess Magnus's plan is to go bishop h3, because that protects the pawn, and then he wants to go a4 at some moment, because he really wants to use the rook on the b file. He wants to get that into the heart of the black position. It could work, but on the other hand, if you go a4, like let's do a move like rook e8, eyeing this pawn at some opportune moment, and then if we go a4, just take that one, and then go a3. This is a reasonably, you could see this pawn becoming kind of dangerous, right? So it's not like risk-free giving black a passed pawn 2 moves away from becoming a new queen. But it could be good. I mean, some move like queen a2, and then next move you go rook d7. And it's actually tricky for black to keep the protection on a3. But there's the f5 move. F5 move at the right moment is going to cut the defense on e6. And if you play f5 after kind of having the distraction of the pawn on a3, that's probably going to be good for black. Whereas if in this position, if you play f5 here, then white is just going to go rook e1, and you're going to go like h5, h6, and there's going to be some trouble around the black king, because it actually does matter that you've given up this g5 square with the pawn. The white queen can come to g5, create some attacks. You would rather not play f5 when white can easily defend on e6. Is it just me, or is it more stuff, more chat going on than normal? I cannot keep up. Crispy and college food. I'm guessing crunchy taco shell discussion is not really what I'm gonna spend time trying to understand the what's being discussed. You should make a number 2 emote, says Chespe. Yeah, No, I joke about being second, but in many ways. Uh, but it's not that funny. It's nice to be number one once in a while. It's difficult to be number one in Norway with Magnus around. I do okay as a number two, both as a helper and as a number two ranked player. Are we gonna look at some of the other games? I'm gonna say no, because Magnus is down on time, and that's not really very common. Magnus being down on time is not that common. So Aronian has been playing very quickly in what I can only say is a complicated game. I think today's game has been very, very exciting, but the fact that they have been playing it so quickly kind of makes it less exciting. Because with such a complex, complicated, difficult decision kind of game as this one, then one of the highlights is going to be the time scramble before move 40. And with the pace Aronian has had in this game, I'm not sure there's going to be a time scramble. They're already at move 26. With Magnus having 35 minutes, I mean, he has more than 2 minutes per move to make the time control, and that should usually be absolutely no problem. Did I miss a thunder? Jens Jensen. No, no wait. Jens Jensensen has subscribed. Thank you for subscribing. I didn't hear the thunder, and I think I didn't turn it off, so I don't know what's going on. Avalanche asks, what plans do you have for the gnomes in the next Pro Chess League? My plan is pretty simple. It's basically the same thing every year. Beg Magnus to be available, and if he is, then we normally have quite a bit of success. And if he's not available, we have a tendency of losing games. So yeah, it's the team does better when Magnus is around. Let's put it like that. So I guess I'll hope for Magnus to be available. And as we saw this season, even having Magnus on the team is no guarantee for making it through to the knockout stages. We were very, very close, but it was one draw too many. Had we made a win instead of a draw in the final match, then we would have been through. But that's kind of the point of the Pro Chess League, right? That this American style of thinking, that all the teams are approximately the same strength. So it's almost impossible to manage to guess the winner. Because I mean, every team with the rating cap of 2,500, every team is going to have an average rating about 2,500, and that makes for a very close and very difficult to predict uh, season. Groger is saying Hammer needs to be on second board every round. Yeah, maybe I should have played more. I really thought that if I were streaming while playing, it would be kind of unprofessional, or at least I would be letting the team down, not having full focus on the game. But with hindsight, I was one of the better scoring players, even though I was streaming at the same time. So it's a difficult thing to figure out. Distant fire. The real question is, when are you going to become Norway's #1 Fortnite player? Yeah, I don't see that happening anytime. Uh, but on the topic of Fortnite, I'm gonna do a little plug for my stream with Alec TV, who we got introduced to through the Chess Bra stream. Eric doing some Fortnite after the candidates coverage to de-stress, I guess, basically. And he seems like a pretty nice guy, and he's one hell of a Fortnite player. So I'm gonna be playing some duos with him uh, on Monday the 16th. In 10 days, I'm gonna play Fortnite duos with Alec TV. So that's gonna be interesting. Maybe he can carry me to a battle royale win. And I'm thinking for May, if I have the time, maybe I'll try some Civ 6. I'm thinking maybe I can try to do one gaming day per month or every second month if people are interested. That game sucks, says Bong Cloud. Yeah, no, I kind of agree. But I think it's about when you're not very good at something, you don't really enjoy it. So I tried playing some squads, teams of four, with Alec and Eric Hansen and some friend of theirs or something. And that I really enjoyed because then even though you kind of just you're not very good at the game and you just stay away from all the fighting and try to get a shot in or two, then you really enjoy it. But for me playing single player Fortnite, it's just I'm not gonna do it because I don't enjoy it and I think I'm so bad at the game that single player when I have nobody to carry me, I just end up in a firefight and get shot, and that's not fun. Okay, stuff is happening. Magnus thinking for about 10 minutes, and then he goes for this a4 move. But this is interesting. He goes for a4 without protecting the pawn on e6. I mean, really? That comes as a shock to me. A4 without protecting this one. What is going on? Number one, I would be tempted to just take this guy. I mean, I can take this guy and still be attacking on e6. I get a passed pawn. It's not really clear whether or not the white rook can do any damage on the b file. So taking the pawn is definitely a possibility. But also just taking on e6. I mean, also this is not going to be a complete disaster, right? Takes back. I guess we take this one again. Uh, in such a position, white is probably a little bit better because he still has the pressure against d5, whereas black has no pressure against c3. So it's definitely white having the better position. But it being enough to win, I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so. Um, but on the other hand, if you have the choice between a passive but holdable position and winning a pawn in one move, I would probably just take that pawn and try to figure out what is Magnus planning, because that is not obvious at all. Just taking it. Seriously, I'm kind of shocked because I don't see the follow up. I don't see what the plan is if you take this one. Okay, so there's been some moves. Okay, Aronian keeps playing really quickly, and he takes the pawn at a4, and now Magnus goes queen a2. What is going on? I mean, now black is going to be a pawn up, right? Take this one, take that one. This is basically the position we were looking at earlier, just with black having the extra pawn on a6. How you doing, Terrible Joe? Chesbey has coffee and hammer. Life is good, she says. Yeah, no, before going online, I tried some um, cinnamon and raisin bagels with some kind of turkey ham thing. That was pretty good. So I'm enjoying life as well. Unfortunately, tea is banned in this house, so I'm not getting my regular cup of tea. That's sad. Let's do some teacups to express sadness. Maybe I can do a sad face as well. I don't have a sad face. Let's do a pensive face. Chesbey is criticizing my choice of spread for the cinnamon raisin bagels. You put butter or cream cheese or peanut butter. And you've just mentioned three things that I don't eat. So that's not gonna happen. Um, Brandon asks, was the game I mentioned over the board inspiration or preparation? That means I need to go back to find out what he's talking about. I loved your game against Eric Zude. Super instructive. Uh, you know how chess players always say that, yeah, no, my memory is amazing. I can remember everything. Um, I don't know how if they are lying or not, but it's certainly not true for me. Eric Zude, 2015. Yeah, I don't recall. I don't recall. I remember a game that I think was similar, but I don't think that was against Zude. I think that was against some other German doctor. Uh, yeah. No, I'm sorry, Brandon. I don't. Braden. Sorry, Braden. I don't remember that game. Civilization is awesome, says Avalanche. Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm kind of disappointed that the one time I tried streaming Civilization, I spent 23 hours for one game. Uh, it was a Philidor when you played G4. Yeah, no, yeah, from Politiken, right? No, that was just over the board stuff. Over the board stuff. Good afternoon, says John Remail. Fife is in the chat. I mean, is it just me or is the chat much more filled with people than normal? I love it, of course, but it makes it a bit more difficult to follow everyone. Okay, so queen a2 was played. Aronian once again. I mean, I'm pretty shocked about this because Aronian is playing so quickly, and he has a 20-minute time advantage on Magnus. That is not normal. 20-minute time advantage on Magnus. Aronian has decided to keep his passed pawn, so he pushes it to a3, protected by the queen on d6. I mean, is he just gonna ignore the white pawn on e6? Is his plan now to win with the a3 pawn? I don't know. But this kind of gives Magnus an opportunity, right? To play bishop h3 and for okay, maybe not forever, but for a move prevent black from taking this one. But as I'm saying it, f5 does look strong. Because I was talking about how f5 wasn't that great when white could just play rook e1. But the circumstances have changed. And this pawn on a3 means that the rook needs to stay on the b file, because otherwise black is going to take the b file. Otherwise black is just going to come here and take it. And also f5 means that you can go f4 in the next move. That's also a pretty good plan. f4, trying to attack g3, trying to open up, remove some of the pawns in front of the white king. That's a really good move. So maybe bishop h3 is not good. I'm starting to think that Magnus is in trouble. And I mean, why wouldn't he be? He's a pawn down, right? But he seemed to be in control just a couple of moves ago. So I think the trend is definitely in Aronian's favor. Okay, so a3 has been played. Magnus goes rook b4. Okay, so clearly he's trying to take the pawn on a3, and he's doing that by blockading the diagonal, the queen's diagonal toward the pawn. I tried to say b file, but if you if you think I said b file, that's fine. Hammer, what do you have to say about the game versus Meyer? Yeah, I don't know. He was in trouble, right? But the line that Meyer had was incredibly difficult to find. So the computer finds it without any problems, but for the guy sitting at the board, it was never going to be easy. So I think a draw was okay. But of course, it's not good for Magnus to land in trouble against some of the bottom seeds in the tournament. No, I'm not playing Cool Bear. I'm not playing the Pro Chess League, and I'm not playing this game. This is between Carlsen with the white pieces against Aronian. And after rook b4, I'm thinking that Magnus might be worse. h5. Wow. You could have given me 20 guesses for the next move. I don't think h5 would be any of those guesses. Wow. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I was not expecting that move. h5. Okay, so I think the idea is that he wants to avoid white playing h5. So kind of when your opponent wants to put the pawn forward, I don't know if it's a lag or something, but my arrows are just not cooperating today. So if you want to go h5, the only kind of way for black to stop that is playing h5 yourself. So I think it's a preventive measure against white going up with the pawn. And then I think Aronian is thinking about going g6, g6, and maybe king g7, um, kind of securing his king position. I guess he's also gonna take the pawn on e6. But if he was gonna take that pawn, why didn't he do this move? That's a big question. Why not take on e6 here instead of playing h5? No, very mysterious move. Aronian makes it pretty quickly. I think the pace at which Aronian is playing right now means that he's confident. I mean, he's feeling good about his position. Otherwise, he wouldn't be playing this quickly. And he's using the time as a weapon, going after Magnus. Because Magnus is not used to being 20 minutes down on the clock. Chess Bay has been watching my Magnus commentary in Norwegian, and it requires a lot more reading of his facial expressions and general confusion. Yeah, I would imagine. I would imagine. He sounds like Christoph Waltz. Says, I don't have bones. Okay. I have no idea whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so h5 has been played. Magnus is thinking. I really think Magnus is in trouble, which surprises me because when we entered the game, the computer was saying that Magnus had a slight edge. And now, I mean, he's given away a pawn on the queen side, and this pawn on e6 is not going to survive for very long. Actually, it's not going to survive the next move. Unless, of course, can Magnus go queen e2? Because that would both protect this pawn and attack this one. But I don't know how helpful it's going to be because I guess black is just going to go g6. And when you move the queen away from the pawn a3, white isn't going to be able to remove that pawn. And that's kind of important because the pawn is two moves away from queening. So you might want to make sure that your opponent doesn't get a new queen. I'm curious about the computer evaluation here. I'm starting to think that Magnus could be in really, really, really big trouble. Vertrich has been doing lots of tactics and discovered that chess is harder now. Well, I guess you have a better understanding of the complexity of the game, right? So then you just got to do many, many, many more tactics to realize that, yeah, the game is complex, but I got it pretty much under control. A little bit, at least. Christopher Waltz was the epic German officer in the bar scene of Inglourious Basterds. Okay. My accent sounds German? Now I stopped smiling. That's not good. Germans can't speak English. Everyone knows that. Which opening was played? Asks Goethe. Okay, we're gonna do a quick replay of the opening. It was an English which turned into what is called a Mykenas variation, because this is the variation where white goes e4 on move 3 to counter this I guess normal way of playing with knight f6 and e6. So if we were to go d4 here, then it would just become a normal Nimzo-Indian after bishop b4. So white is trying to exploit the fact that he played the English move order, 1c4, and you get this extra option of the Mykenas variation. But then d5 strikes back in the center immediately. And then this is a topical discussion on the top level, how to evaluate this kind of position. One of the games actually was Aronian with the white pieces in the candidates against Ding Li Ren. So Aronian has been on the white side as well as the black side of this line, and it's pretty creative. It's not really, people haven't decided on what is the best way to play, which means that it's a very interesting opening because it's still being developed. People are still trying to figure out what is the right way to play for both sides. But as the position stands right now, it does seem like Aronian with the black pieces has had the better of this opening. Okay, so after h5, Magnus takes on a3. He's now 25 minutes behind on the clock. I think Aronian is the only one capable of getting Magnus to think like this. So he got rid of that annoying pawn. He's creating attack toward the pawn on a6. But now there's a big question going on, because one of the options Aronian has is to go knight c6. So Aronian, if he wants to, I think he can force the queen exchange. But I think if he tries to go for the queen exchange, it means that he's very happy to make a draw. Because I really don't see white losing this. Take this one, a5, and then just e7. a5 and e7. Trade. Trade. And it's a probable draw, but if anyone is better, it's white, because white is the one attacking the weakness on d5. My computer is not having a good time, and it's affecting the arrows. But the stream is okay, right? And the sound is okay. So if the arrows is the only problem, I guess that's something we are going to live with. Bon Cloud, GMs don't need tactics, they see all the moves. Yeah, no, that's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. But I do agree that the most difficult thing in chess is deciding between different variations. So trying to evaluate whether this position is better than this position, and by extension of that, making a call between doing this move or this move, leading to those different situations. That is the most difficult thing. But it's not like we see all the moves. Otherwise, anytime people had a decisive advantage on the computer, people would win, which is not the case. There's been a big discussion about tactics, and I missed it. Some GMs say they don't do tactics ever. Hansen said that he doesn't do tactics. Wow, that sounds unbelievable. Okay, but this position I think is good for Magnus, or not losing, which I kind of got concerned about the current situation that White might be in trouble. Uh, so knight c6, trying to exchange off queens, that's not gonna be a problem. Maybe Aronian can be more clever about it. Look at this move, a5. That's interesting. a5, and then if queen takes a5, you play knight c6 with a fork. Does that work? Probably it does, I think. I think it might work. Queen takes a5. Oh, my computer is not having a good time. Take it. Come on, there. So take that one and then knight c6. It's a doubled attack on the queen and the rook. And I don't think white is getting away with that. So I think we gotta go back. I think this pawn is poisonous. So let's go rook a4 instead, moving the rook while keeping the queen protected. And then I guess we're exchanging queens. Yeah, sorry guys. It's not being very cooperative. But people don't care. They're having their own discussion in the chat, discussing whether or not Eric Hansen does tactics. Never did tactics. He played blitz and analyzed every single game. I don't believe it. I'm sorry. I don't believe it. I don't think you cannot do tactics. Especially when the only way he wins against me every single time is some kind of cheap tactical trick. I guess what you're saying is that cheap tactical tricks are innate. Maybe. I don't do them, at least. Well, I try to do them, but unsuccessfully. I guess that's a big difference as well. Okay, I don't know how to evaluate this position. Here, black managed to keep his passed pawn, but so did white. And it's a question of whether or not black is able to come with his king. Maybe something like g6, g6, f5, and then king coming to f6 and trying to pick up this pawn. If you manage to do that, you're going to win with black. So I'm inclined to say that this might be promising for black. There's some definite potential here because the pawn on e6 is pretty weak, and yeah, it's difficult to defend. And black has a pretty clear-cut way of getting his king close to the pawn, and then if he gets a pawn, he's going to be a pawn up. So that's pretty good. So I guess this was, I'm guessing that was Aronian's plan when going into this. I think he wants to go a5, and him hesitating makes me think that maybe there's some possibility of taking this pawn after all. Maybe there's some kind of tactic in this position, which I am not able to find. Knight c6. To me, it really looks like a fork, and I don't see how to exploit the passed pawn on e6. Yeah, no, this doesn't look good for black to me, so I think he's going for a5. Braden says, can you look at rook b6 after a5? Yes, I can, but it's going to be a pretty short story, I think. Because rook b6, I take your queen. I guess your idea was that if I take the rook, then you take on e7 and get a really dangerous attack. But I'm going to ignore that rook. I'm just going to take your queen. And then I think you're going to resign. So that's kind of the deal, what's going on, right? Is that the rook is pinned. So there's only two possible moves after a5. Either you take that pawn or you move the rook so that it protects the queen. Ah, you meant after knight c6. Okay, that's a different story. So takes knight c6 and rook b6. Knight c6. Come on now. Oh, are you kidding me? No, to me it's weird that it's not working now, but it was working when I started the stream. And my computer isn't even overheating. So it seems to be coping pretty well with the stream, but it's unable to do knight c6. Okay, we got there in the end. Rook b6, I'm gonna take your queen once again. I guess your only really try is taking my queen, but at that point you're gonna be a rook down, and then I'm gonna use my king to stop the e7 pawn. So knight takes queen, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, e7, and now I see that if I go rook e6, you're gonna have this nasty bishop takes d5. But because of that, I'm not gonna go rook e6. I'm gonna go king f7. After which I stop your pawn. Actually, I even capture it on the next move, and you're just a rook down. So that's bad news. Bad news for white. Oslo asks, "What are you doing in San Francisco? Is Oslo not good enough for you?" I'm cherry picking my cities, so I'm thinking that Oslo now for the week I'm away. That's gonna give the city time to uh, keep melting the snow, and then we're gonna have some spring cleaning. The municipality is gonna be out with their big machines, uh, brooming away the the gravel on the streets. And so I'm thinking when I'm back home in a week, it's gonna be excellent bicycling conditions. And I really do think that Norwegian summers are the very best thing in the world. I don't think anyone can top Norwegian summers. It's just the right amount of warm and nice and everything. Uh, but this period between winter and summer, some people call it spring. I call it the melting snow disaster. You walk around the streets of Oslo and you go and your feet gets wet and there's nowhere good to go walk and so on. So I'm thinking the timing is excellent on my part, and I'm here to watch the Pro Chess League live. So it's going to be the first esport event in chess. So I wanted to attend that, and I wanted to go to San Francisco. I'm not sure I would have gone if the finals were in like I guess New York or Texas, right? If it was in Texas, I wouldn't go. But the thing about San Francisco is that I lived here for a year with my family, some 18 years ago. So I'm also taking a trip down memory lane. I went yesterday. I went to my old school and tried to see if anything had changed. Um, Spoiler alert, no, everything was just the exact same. I walked by the house where we lived. It was pretty much the same as well. They had done some renovations. It looked pretty good. I went to the Rose Park, the public tennis courts, which is the first place I ever played tennis. And for a Norwegian, in Norway, it's so difficult to find courts. And if you do find courts, they're so expensive. Whereas here in Berkeley, you can just there's public courts and it was nobody was there, and it shocked me. I was speaking to Arun who's hosting me, and he was like, well, it's a bit on the cold side, and I was like, no. So I think for a Norwegian living in Berkeley, that would be just so amazing. Americans thinking it's too cold for tennis and you would have 5 courts for yourself. No one wants to go to Texas, says Chespe. I've been to Texas. I went to Lubbock, played a tournament, the Spice Cup, many years ago. I don't actually mind the snow in Norway. -20 in Norway, I think is fine. You just gotta dress for it. But the when it's when it's differing between -5 in the night and 2, 3 degrees in the morning or during the day, you get this schlaps, the mixture of snow melting into water, and that is just I hate that. It's absolutely terrible. So snow I don't mind, but this waterish melted snow thingy, that's no fun. Okay, so for once Aronian is thinking. He spent more than 10 minutes on this move, and he's been playing really quickly up to this point. My best educated guess would be that he's going to play a5. trying to exchange off the queens. Um, and the line I was going through seemed pretty good for Aronian. So I guess I'm gonna guess that he goes for that. So a5. Oh, come on. a5, and then rook to a4, capture, capture, and then rook a8. I think that's gonna be my guess as to what uh, Aronian is planning. Okay, this is interesting. I'm starting to think of another idea of this h5 move. Oh, this is so cool. An idea of this h5 move might actually be to give the king an escape square on h7. Because in this position, if the pawn was still on h7, then maybe rook to b8 would be the most fantastic move. If the pawn was still on h7. Right? Because then if you take the queen, then rook takes rook is checkmate. And if queen takes the rook on b8, then you take the knight on e7. And you get the queen causing tons of trouble close to the black king, as well as probably the d5 pawn is going to drop off. And if the d5 pawn falls, then the c4 pawn is in trouble as well. So this h5 move might actually be to give the king some air, so that in this position, queen takes a3 is a possibility, because now after rook takes rook, you can escape with king h7. Wow, that is very cool. I wonder if that is part of the reasoning. That is pretty sick. Okay, I think some moves were made. I'm gonna go back, revert to game. Queen takes a3. Aronian goes knight c6. That surprises me. Wow, that surprises me a lot. So he's just going into this slightly worse endgame. Okay. Rook a4. Takes. Takes. a5. Now the difference between having the knight on e7 and c6 is that when the knight was on e7, you could go rook a8 to give the pawn on a5 more protection. But if you go rook a8 now, there's the pawn on d5 falling. So instead of rook a8 here, he needed to go a5. And then Magnus uses the e6 pawn as a distraction, going e7, takes that pawn, and then you take on a5. So Levon, for a couple of moves, he was a pawn up. But that is over. Levon no longer a pawn up. He's actually just trying to make a draw. And this rook b8 move, he's going for the root of the pawn chain, going for the pawn that is not protected by another pawn with rook b8. Magnus takes on d5, takes back, rook takes, and Magnus is going to be a pawn up. Wow, what a turnaround. That was, to me, that's a shocking decision from Aronian, because to me it looked like the a5 move was pretty good. And instead of playing that a5 move, he's going into a rook endgame with a pawn down. Now this rook endgame should be a draw, but still it feels unnecessary compared to the situation he had on the board. So rook takes d5, rook b3, rook takes h5, and now had he not placed the pawn on h5, this pawn wouldn't have been lost. So the way the game developed, having that pawn on h5 was definitely not a good thing. Rook takes c3, rook c5, rook c1 check, king up, c3. What is Levon doing? I mean, Magnus might even play king f3, and it's not clear that Aronian is able to exchange off this pawn on d4 for the pawn on c3. Ah, yes, he is. So king f3, king f3, then c2. Okay, so king f3 is going to be the normal move for Magnus. And then c2, king e2, rook d1 is going to manage to exchange off these pawns on the, I'm going to say queen side, but I guess it's more like in the center. Okay, I'm just going to have to follow the game because inserting moves is not working for me. Okay, so takes, rook b3, takes on c3, check, king g2, pawn goes, king up, and c2. So now the aim for black is exchanging this pawn on c2 for this pawn on d4. And Levon is going to be able to do that because on the next move he will play rook d1, and then white will have no other choice than to take the pawn on c2, after which black can take the pawn on d4. And if Magnus goes something like king e4, trying to protect the pawn on d4, then rook e1 is winning for black, because then you give it the check, and you're able to promote the pawn on the next move. So Magnus goes king f4, trying to get some activity. And then rook d1, this idea, trying to exchange off the pawns, takes. Magnus is going to go up with his king, and then Aronian goes king h7 to make sure that the white king is unable to proceed to this very good g6 square. And we have a pawn ending, no, we have a rook ending with a pawn up for white. That's always nice, but the thing is that all the pawns are on the same side of the board, which makes the defensive task easier. And yeah, this should be a draw, but white has, it's unusual for white to have his king so actively placed up the board. So it's a better version of a rook endgame with a pawn up than what is normal. But I would think it's still a draw. Looks like game over now, says Avalanche. MC winning, says VGD mod. Really? Is this winning for white? It's a rook endgame with all pawns on the same side. Surely that cannot be winning, right? I would think it's a draw, but it's going to be a very long game. Okay, there's been a lot of non-chess discussions in the chat, but can somebody tell me how do you evaluate this position? To me, it has to be a draw. Um, but probably he can give Aronian some difficulties. I mean, he's gonna make Aronian sit here for a little while, but pawn up. But yeah, no, I don't see him winning this. A 3 against 2 with all the pawns on the same side. It's always a draw, I thought. Bones thinks it's a draw. And you agree with me. I mean, when we both have the same opinion, I guess that's a sign. Distance says, I follow your assessment. The Rev says that Anand is in trouble. That's interesting. Let's go to Anand. Wow, Anand is a bishop down. That's not good. But he's playing against Bleebaum, the lowest rated player in the field. And Bleebaum hasn't been having a very good start to the tournament. So I think even if Bleebaum wins, it's not gonna affect the standings very much. H5, no, H4, that's probably a good move. Yeah, I would say that White has excellent winning chances. So Bleebaum getting a win against the former world champion, that's going to be big for him, the German local talent, together with Meyer and Neidich. It's nice to have those underdogs scoring a win here and there. Even if Norway Chess, the organizers there, do not agree. Furkan asks, did Magnus win any game in Grenke? Yes, I think he has won one game. He won against the female number one, Hu Yifan. So Magnus is on +1, while Vityugov, Vashier, and Caruana are on +2. So this game is actually pretty crucial for the standings. With both players being in shared first place. Vityugov with a pawn up, but competing against the bishop pair, and there not being a lot of pawns left on the board. I guess it's a probable draw, which means that if Magnus is able to win his games, he might actually climb up to a shared first place. Okay, we have Hu Yifan against Caruana. Caruana is also among the leaders. And Hu Yifan, I guess it's looking like a draw. In the opening, the computer said that Hu had an advantage. But now a lot of pieces have been exchanged. Black is definitely better, it seems. But I doubt it's enough to win the game. Caruana should be able to defend this. It's a little bit tricky. Caruana is the one fighting for a draw, but I think he'll be able to do it. Anders is saying that who is pronounced ho, ho. That just sounds weird. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing what Anders says is the right pronunciation, but I'm gonna stick with who. Because the thing is that we Englishify a lot of names, right? Carlsen. When I say Carlsen, right, I know that in Norwegian his name is Carlsen. I guess that's very similar. Um, um Naiditch. Yeah, maybe we are trying to pronounce it as it is correct in their native language. Mayer. Mayer. Because in German it would be more like Mayer, but we're saying George Mayer. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure we should always try to pronounce it as they pronounce it in their own language. And I'm saying that knowing that my name, first names, get butchered by English speaking people all the time, right? Goethe, I guess you will be cheering for Magnus in November. Yeah, yeah. I'm not gonna cheer for the American, if that's what you're asking. Who is your favorite chess champion from the 1900s? Wow. I think that's kind of the sign of a very strong chess player is when you care about chess history. Um, because we had Simon Agdestein was the coach of the high school I went to, which was kind of like a special high school for people who wanted to get better at their competitive sport. And he was always trying to make us do like homework on the former world champions and so on. And I never really did study those guys. 1900s, I guess that includes a lot of people, right? So I'm gonna say Kasparov, right? Probably the second strongest player of all time, right? After Magnus. Some would even say that Kasparov is the strongest player of all time. But I cannot play like Kasparov. That I kind of realized a long time ago. Ghetto Porridge is happy about the unscheduled stream, watching the exciting game between Carlsen and Aronian, although at this point the excitement has kind of disappeared. There's a rook endgame 3 against 2. It was more exciting a couple of hours ago. G4. That's interesting. I guess Aronian is gonna have to kick back Magnus with G6. But on the other hand, that looks to be a pretty solid move. Unless Magnus is able to take the 7th rank. Huh. Yeah, no, I mean, Magnus is definitely better, but defeating Aronian with a pawn up, all pawns on the same side in a rook endgame, and Aronian has more than an hour left on the clock, it seems very unlikely. Fraggy says, this looks like a known rook endgame. No, it's actually very unusual that the white king is so aggressive. But now that Aronian has kicked the king away, it starts to be more, let's say, normal. But there's still some big decisions, right? Do you give a check on e6, or do you give a check on a4? That's already a big decision. And the good thing about giving a check on e6 is that then white cannot block the check with his rook. But on the other hand, I guess if you check on a4 and then rook d4, you get the option of going rook a5, which looks pretty good. It should be a draw, but it's not. They're not done thinking just yet. You still need to calculate and kind of make sure that you don't do anything silly. Actually, one of the moves Aronian can play is f5. This is one of the possible moves. And then this is supposed to be a draw. But the thing is that giving yourself 2 pawns down in a rook endgame, even though you know that it's a draw, I mean, do you want to go into that knowing that you might mess it up? So this is supposed to be a draw. H and F pawn. 2 pawns up, and still you're not able to win. But do you go into this against Magnus? I would think not. I would think you try to find some better way of playing it. But the thing is that if you play some other way, then it's probably a draw, but you don't know the kind of way to make a draw. Whereas this position, at least Aronian would know pretty much how you're supposed to play to make a draw. On the other hand, it's also much easier to make a mistake being 2 pawns down than when you're just 1 pawn down. Yeah, so I don't know. It's definitely a draw with best play, objectively a draw, but it could be tricky making it. I'm just going to mention that Bleebaum has won his game against Anand. So that's a nice upset for the young German player. And that also doesn't really affect the standings among the top 5 guys because Anand was already in the bottom half. The who pronunciation discussion is still going on. I guess I'll mention that Yifan in Norwegian kind of sounds like gives F. So to Norwegian, it's a people think it's a very funny name. You've gone back and forth 5 times. Really? Give a damn. Yeah, maybe that's a more accurate translation. But yeah, Norwegians think her name is really funny. Avalanche asks, who was better according to you, Karpov or Tal? Well, Karpov, right? Tal was the magician, but I mean, he had a big heart, but I think a lot of the things he's done kind of, had he been playing in these days, a lot of people would just take his pieces and win. That's the impression I get, but who knows? Someone is saying that Hu Yifan is winning against Caruana. I don't know. She's definitely better. I don't think she's winning. We have the Vashier Lagrave against Vityugov. Probably a draw, but Vityugov is definitely better. We have the Germans. Mayer against Neidich. And who knows what is going on here. This is a complicated position. And both guys very low on time. It's going to be an exciting time scramble. Both guys have 11 more moves to make before reaching the time control. Oh, sorry. Um, yeah. So it's starting to become later, right? It's soon 10 a.m. in San Francisco. Has anything happened in this game? No, Aronian is still thinking after King e4. I'm not going to be watching this game for another 2 hours. That I can guarantee you. So it's a very likely draw. Magnus is better for sure, but I don't really see him winning it. It does seem like that the other top players, Fabiano is not going to be able to win against Hu Yifan, and Vityugov and Vashier Lagrave is a probable draw, which means that the standings in the top half is going to be the same. Before the round, it was Vityugov, Vashier Lagrave, and Caruana who were half a point ahead of Carlsen and Aronian. And if the results go like expected, 3 draws in those 3 games, then we're going to have the same situation going into the last 3 games. This was an unscheduled stream, uh, an exciting game between Aronian and Carlsen. I want to mention that on Monday, I'm going to do the same thing. Wake up early and have a little stream following the final round, the decisive round of the Grenke chess tournament. And in the final round, we will have Magnus Carlsen playing against Vishwanathan Anand, the rivals of the 2 world championship matches. That's going to be an interesting one. Anand lost today, so clearly he's not having a great time in Germany, and probably Magnus will need to win that game to be able to win the tournament. Red Emperor asks, why is there an extra hour on the clock? Um, it's because the players had so much time left going into move 40 that when they got their extra move 40 time, they just ended up having more than an hour on the clock. So this might take some time, and I'm not gonna stick around to watch it. I'm gonna go to San Francisco and do some sightseeing. Maybe do a cable car, Lombardi Street. I really want to go biking in the Golden State Park, but I wouldn't really know how to go about that. Yes, Jumpin' Jackson. This is Strawn, right? Yes. With best play, this definitely should be a draw between Carlsen and Aronian. Capablanca suggests go to a Warriors game. Yeah, I'm not gonna have time for that. Rent a bike and go, says Greg. Yeah, no, but the thing is, if I knew where to go to rent a bike, right, then it wouldn't be a problem. Atomic Player with the 100-bit chair. Did I miss that? I'm gonna mention it just in case. And also thank you to Creekcore for the host. I seem to have missed that as well. Rented bikes down at the docks. So I should go to Fisherman's Wharf to rent a bike? Or I should go to the park to rent a bike? Internet search. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to see if I can find some place to rent a bike. Tomorrow is going to be the Pro Chess League finals. There's going to be lots of coverage on Twitch from the chess user. I'm not going to do any coverage, but I'm going to be around. I'm going to walk about. I'm going to take pictures. Yeah. Yeah, ChessBay suggests I use Google. What is this Google you talk of? Can it really find me a bicycle in San Francisco? Okay, I think that's going to be it from me. Thank you everyone for watching. Do come back on Monday for the final round stream. The game is going to be Carlsen against Anand. Goodbye, everyone.